This Japanese killer brutally deformed his own face in an attempt to get away with murder. Born on January 5th, 1979, Tatsuya Ichihashi would spend his adult life unemployed, living solely off an allowance from his parents, most of which would be spent on gym memberships and manga, including Bleach and One Piece. On March 24, 2007, Ichihashi arranged to meet Lindsay Hawker, a 22-year-old teacher, for an English lesson in a nearby cafe. After finishing the lesson, Ichihashi mentioned that he'd forgotten his wallet and invited Hawker back to his apartment, which was just half a mile away. Hawker reluctantly agreed, and the pair took a taxi to his flat. This, however, would be the last time Hawker was ever seen alive. Once inside the flat, Ichihashi attacked Hawker, viciously beating, raping and strangling her, until the cartilage in her neck broke. Ichihashi then proceeded to bury the corpse in a bath on his balcony, using a mixture of sand and compost soil in an attempt to speed up the body's decomposition. Hawker was quickly reported missing, and the police arrived at Ichihashi's apartment on the evening of March 26th. However, they failed to make the arrest, and Ichihashi fled on foot, marking the start of a 2-year-long manhunt. During this time, Ichihashi worked a number of odd jobs to get by, and spent a large portion of his wages on cosmetic surgery to alter his appearance in an attempt to avoid arrest. However, on November 10, 2009, he was finally caught by police, following a tip-off from his plastic surgeon. The 28-year-old was tried and sentenced to life in prison, where he remains to this day. This Japanese high school student was abducted, tortured for 44 days, and murdered by 4 teenage boys. Junko Furuta was born on January 18, 1971, but on the evening of November 25, 1988, her life would take a horrifying turn. As she cycled home, Furuta was spotted by 2 teenage boys. One of the boys attacked her, kicking her off her bike. The boy then took her to a nearby park where 3 of his friends were waiting. The 4 boys overpowered her and took her to a house owned by one of the boys' parents. Here, Furuta was held captive and tortured relentlessly, with the 4 boys beating and burning her on a daily basis. Over the course of the 44 days she was held captive, she was raped over 400 times by the 4 boys and other men and teenagers that they knew. Soon after this, Furuta was beaten to death by the 4 boys before being dumped into a 55-gallon drum, which was then filled with concrete. The 4 boys were quickly arrested, but were given shockingly light sentences for the severity of their crimes, with the prison time ranging from 5 to 20 years. All 4 men were eventually released from prison and allowed to live as free men. This man brutally killed 19 disabled people at a Japanese care home. Born on January 20th, 1990, Satoshi Uematsu grew up in Japan and went on to become an elementary school teacher before going to work at a care home. After 3 years, Uematsu quit his job, and in February 2016 he began to petition for the legalization of ending the lives of those with disabilities, writing that the killing of disabled people would be for the sake of Japan and world peace. In the early hours of July 26, 2016, Uematsu decided to take matters into his own hands and broke into his former workplace. From here, he tied up the staff members at knife point before going room to room and stabbing the disabled residents as they slept. 2 hours after the horrific attack, Uematsu turned himself in at a local police station and confessed to the murders, explaining that he committed the attack to save his victims and their families from unhappiness. Uematsu was tried and sentenced to death on March 30th, 2020, and remains on death row to this day. This Japanese family of 4 was brutally murdered in their own home. The Miyazawa family moved to Setagaya, Tokyo in 1991 and lived there peacefully for a number of years. However, on December 30th, 2000, this would all come to a terrifying end. At 11:30 PM, an unknown killer entered the house through an upstairs window, climbing a tree outside the house to gain access. Once inside the house, the killer found the Miyazawa's 6-year-old son asleep in his bed and strangled him to death. Hearing the disturbance in his son's room, Mikio Miyazawa ran upstairs and attacked the killer, but was viciously stabbed in the head. The killer then attacked Mikio's wife and daughter, brutally killing them with a knife from their own kitchen. After the murders, the killer remained in the house for up to 10 hours, using the family's computer, eating their food, and taking a nap in their living room. The bodies were discovered the next morning by a family member, and an investigation began immediately. Although the police found a high amount of evidence in the house, including the killer's fingerprints, blood and clothes, they were never able to identify a suspect, and the case is still being investigated to this day, with the killer continuing to live as a free man. This man is one of the most disturbing serial killers in Japan's history. Born on August 21st, 1962, Tsutomu Miyazaki grew up in Tokyo and was raised mainly by his grandfather. Miyazaki was heavily bullied throughout his childhood due to a rare birth defect that caused his hand joints to be fused together, resulting in him feeling alone and depressed. In 1988, Miyazaki's grandfather died, making his feelings of isolation even worse. In an attempt to retain something from his grandfather, Miyazaki ate some of his ashes. However, the worst was yet to come. Over the next year, Miyazaki would go on to kill 4 young girls between the ages of 4 and 7. 1987. He would abduct his victims in his car before driving to an isolated area where he would murder them and dismember their corpses. Miyazaki would also engage in necrophilia and cannibalism, preserving parts of his victims' bodies and drinking their blood. After killing his second victim, Miyazaki sent a box to the young girl's family containing the powder of her ground up bones and a handwritten letter taunting the family. After his arrest in 1989, Miyazaki would blame his actions on Ratman, an alter ego that forced him to kill. The judge, however, was not convinced and sentenced the man to death.